What's your job right now?
So today or in the next couple of weeks. So
You can say today and this.
So what I'm doing today is I'm the manager of outreach and case management at Healthcare for the Homeless of Orlando. And what we do is we, over a 3-county region, we manage all the outreach programs, the PATH teams, the outreach. We have 5 different outreach teams. We have a veterans outreach team. We have one that focuses on the downtown inner city area, one that focuses on the county of Orange at large, and then we have one that focuses on Osceola County, and then there's another team that focuses on Seminole County.
Okay. And your next job in 2 weeks?
In 2 weeks, I'll be the director of the new In Street Village shelter. The first shelter for single women in DC. So the mayor just came up with a plan to put shelters in every district in the District of Columbia, every ward. So there's 9 wards. So she's going to build 9 shelters. This is the first one. So
wonderful.
I always get these positions that are kind of the test. So they're a model to see if the project works, and then usually I leave and someone else takes it over is what happens.
After you've set the goal.
Well, hopefully.
Okay.
All right, well, here's something that might look familiar to you.
Absolutely, it does. This is the one. Is this the first edition of Street Vibes, or one of the first?
You would be more of an authority on that question.
And we started in '96 with just a simple cover over the homeless grapevine from Cleveland, and then in the early part of 1997, we started our own paper, and this is one of the original copies of that paper, and we absolutely had to start it off with a story about Buddy. And I always loved that we had, this whole crew of people that were really amazing, that Berta Lambert and Greg Payton and a bunch of other people. I see on the back it talks about, we had a little media conglomerate back then. We had a radio show and a television show. So it's amazing to see this. It brings back some pretty lasting memories of getting started in our humble office on Elm Street. So.
And talk a little bit about Buddy. I didn't know him.
So Buddy was amazing. Buddy was the I'm sorry.
Yeah, you gotta hand that back.
I'll give it back. So Buddy was just incredibly intelligent. He was extremely passionate, and he was really a fun guy to be around. Quite the jokester, but he was a person. He mentored me. We took these long trips, and we would talk all the time. We went to Dallas and DC, and we traveled through Ohio most of the time. But Buddy, he just had such a grasp of programs and design for buildings and the intergovernmental relations in Cincinnati and in Columbus and even at the national level. He was just an amazing wealth of knowledge. He was extremely dedicated. Sometimes Buddy would work into the middle of the night on a grant or the actual physical work in a building. And one thing that Buddy did is he always made you feel important. I think the thing that always kind of I reflect back on was he always did this thing when he introduced me. He would always say, "Have you met Donald Whitehead yet? You need to meet him." And it just was incredibly inspiring to someone who had just come from the streets. And I'll never forget these. He always did these little short phrases that stuck with you. And the one I remember most was the first time I met him. After we talked for an hour, he said, "I'm glad you're here." And every time I thought, I can't do this, I'm ready to give up, I remembered, I'm glad you're here. And the other one was, and I didn't say this in the 20-year anniversary speech that I did yesterday. Buddy at the recovery hotel, there were 4 people who were there, me and 3 other guys. And Buddy would ride past every night, and he would say, "Stay out of the window." And I never knew why he said that, why he would always drive by and do that. But he knew that the things that were going on at that time and over the Rhine outside of the window were things that would cause some detrimental consequences to the guys in the building. So he wanted us to know that he was watching. And if we just focused on what was inside, maybe it was reading the material for our 12-step program or watching a movie or just reading a book in general, it would help us stay clean. And part of my speech that I didn't get to say was I bet Buddy's in heaven, and Charlie and Jimmy Heath and Ed Deering live on the same street, and Buddy rides by every night and says, "Stay out of the window." So he was an amazing guy. People loved Buddy, whether it was at the National Coalition, which he helped to found, or the State Coalition. They really, really loved Buddy. Now, they didn't want to get in a fight with Buddy, but they really loved him. He was a tiger in the battle, too. Some of the speeches that he gave at City Hall are memorable, remarkable. Nobody else will have that kind of courage to say some of the things he said, and in a very respectful way. It wasn't kind of, an argumentative or antagonistic. It was antagonistic, but not in a way that wasn't a very respectful way. So that was Buddy. And I could go on about Buddy forever because he really was a special man, and I really, really, really fully, totally respected him more than anybody else I've ever met.
Why don't we talk about you and your journey?
So my journey was early in life I experienced, I guess, what most people consider success. I was mayor, councilman for a day in Cincinnati. Interestingly enough, my council partner was Jerry Springer at the time. So I was, and he's actually helped me throughout my life. But so that was some of the top high school students in the city who were selected, and we went down to City Hall for a week. And there was kind of a competition where you came up with a plan for the city, and 10 people got chosen. For one would be the mayor for a day, and the other 9 would be the council person, and these were like 5 people from every school in the city. So I actually got to be in that top 10. So I always experienced success. I was voted most likely to succeed in high school. I was captain of the football team, vice president of my senior class, and got a scholarship to the University of Cincinnati. So I was well on my way to becoming a lawyer. And something happened along the way, and that was the disease of addiction. So, in elementary school, my mother taught at the school, so I was a person that was always kind of carefully watched and kind of kept in line. As I got older, though, that kind of supervision waned a little bit, and once you get to college, you're on your own. So I spent a lot of time in a place at the University of Cincinnati that's called the Rhine Room. It was a bar on campus, basically. So usually by noontime, I was totally plastered, and so I couldn't make it to my evening classes, and I actually just withdrew. I was going to play football, never quite made it. Went to a couple of practices, and then just stopped going. So I got really into the chaos of I would partied all the time and hung out with the wrong people, and finally ended up kind of trapped in addiction. My next thought was I can fix this by going to the Navy, and little did I know that was probably an even worse decision. So I went to the Navy, and I was 19 or 20, and I was around all these 40-year-old guys who, they partied and drank the same as my friends back in Cincinnati, and my addiction followed me there. Did very well in the beginning, was an E5 in less than 2 years, which is kind of unheard of, and then started to get in trouble. We went to foreign countries, and I would always outdrink all my buddies and get in trouble. And finally, when I got back to San Diego after a world tour, where I never got to see any of the world because I was always confined to the ship because of my behavior when I got off, I was asked to leave the Navy. So actually, the first time they wanted me to stay because when I was sober, I was a pretty good soldier. But when I got near alcohol or drugs, it just life evaporated for me. And so the second time I chose not to. I actually could have stayed then, but I chose not to. I kind of had enough because I thought it was going to solve my addiction, and it didn't. It actually probably exacerbated it. So when I got back to Cincinnati, worked for a Jewish hospital for a while, had pretty decent jobs, sold cars for a while, got married, started living the American dream, and kind of, at that point, I kind of backed away. I kind of tried to stay clean on my own, but finally, because I'm an addict and I need treatment for addiction, I actually started to use again, and finally that I lost everything, lost the house, the jobs, the cars. Homelessness for me started out in somebody's basement or somebody's spare room, but then it became homeless in the real sense. Didn't know about any of the downtown facilities because I had never been involved in. We were a middle class family, so I didn't know anything about extreme poverty. So didn't know the drop-in center existed, so I first went to the Gospel Mission, and I stayed there for about 60 days, and then I kind of left on kind of a religious zeal. So I left the Gospel Mission. I had become pretty involved in the church at that time. And stayed clean for 60 days, and then I realized that church was on Sunday, but I could use from Monday till Sunday, and so that's what I did. And again, lost my place, became homeless. This time, the Gospel Mission would take me back, so I went to the drop-in center, and I probably stayed there for 4 months. Still using, working at temporary agencies every day, and then one of the RAs finally caught up with me, and I'm blanking on his name, but he said, "I've been watching you. I see you go to work every day, and you're not putting any money in the 50-50 plan." And that was the plan at the drop-in center, where if you worked, you had to put 50% of your income into a savings plan. And he said, "We don't know what you're doing with your money," and what I was doing was using, but you have to stop. You have to stop this, or we're going to ask you to leave. And so, to avoid paying money, I decided to go into the treatment program. And I was asked to stay over the weekend inside. The day was the 23rd of August. I was supposed to stay inside for those 3 days to qualify, and of course I left every day. Nobody noticed that though. And then on the 25th, they let me go into the program, and I haven't used since then. August the 25th, 1995 was my last day, and I became involved with Ed Deering, who was the program director, and at the same time, they would ask. Buddy was in front of City Hall a lot, so he would ask for volunteers to go speak, and I started volunteering, and I think I did pretty well, and so he started letting me go to other places. I went to Columbus, and we went to conferences in other cities, and I remember the first time that I had to do kind of a bigger speech. Buddy took me to Dallas, Texas, and it was a conference, and he said, "We're going to ask you to speak in front of a few people," and it turned out I was on the keynote panel that day. So it was like 4,000 people. So that was, I never will forgive Buddy for that, but it was my first time, and so and after that, I did 6 months. One of the components of the program was community service. I did my community service at the Coalition, and the Coalition was At that time, there was an office, but Pat Clifford was the director. He was also the administrator at the drop-in center. So the office was there, but it was never used. Then they hired me, and it was kind of similar to what you guys are doing here on the second floor. This is kind of what the office looked like. And so we had to redo all of that interior and kind of make it a functional office. And then the coalition actually was a physical office at that point. So I was the only staff. Pat still worked at the coalition. I was the outreach coordinator. And shortly after that, Buddy was killed. When Buddy was killed, Pat became the director of the coalition. The director of the drop-in center, and I became director of the coalition, which I stayed at the coalition after that time for 3 years. I took a job after that at Goodwill Industries, where I managed about 10 case managers in a program called the Thrive program, and it was after welfare reform. So these were people that had 6 months to get a job after some being on welfare for 20 years, and they had to come up with a viable job with no job skills, no job readiness. But we were able to get about 70% of those people into jobs. I was then approached by the National Coalition. By that time, I had become a board member. And 2 years after I became a board member, I became a board president. And we did a hiring. We lost our executive director. We did sort of a search process, and I was recruited, and I was then able to become the director of the National Coalition. And I did that for 4 years, and I really enjoyed it, but had some personal tragedy, and kind of reevaluated my whole life. At that time, I lost my daughter to cancer, and it was actually a couple of things. It was, I was really not very pleased about the direction of national policy, and we had written a bill that probably would have ended homelessness back then, and spent every day for almost 2 years on Capitol Hill talking to congressional representatives. Out of hundreds of talks, we got 40 people to sign on. And everybody was really enamored by the housing first model, and we were opposed to that being the only model to use because it affected 20% of the people, and the other 80%, families and children, unaccompanied youth, there was no permanent housing option for them. So we were opposed to it. We were under attack constantly. We were called obstructionists because we said, if you do this, then we'll see a dramatic growth in family homelessness. And years later, that's what happened. And I think there is a recognition now that was a bad idea in the first place. Housing first does work. I don't want to diminish that, but what it does is it doesn't allow for enough housing opportunities for people that don't fit that narrow definition. And we've seen, I think, an increase in street homelessness and an increase in family homelessness because of that. There's some other factors that weigh in, but I think that's the major factor. So that I became disgruntled. I was also probably clinically depressed with the loss of my daughter. So at that point, I decided to do some consulting, and I did that for a couple of years. And then instead of going back into advocacy, I decided to do direct service full time. I then went to a shelter in Virginia for families, stayed there for a couple of years, came back here to Cincinnati, did a transitional housing program. I then went to Baltimore and became the assistant director at a food pantry, which also had transitional housing, and also managed a permanent supportive housing program. So I was able to do both. I was able to do permanent supportive and transitional. So I was actually able to affect most of the population because we did families and individuals. And after that, where did I go after that? It gets fuzzy. Okay, I went to Orlando. And in Orlando, I started a transitional housing program for 2 years. After those 2 years, I opened a 250-bed shelter for men and the next job was the job I have currently. So I've kind of moved around a lot, but I feel that my path is ordered. I'm a pretty faithful person, and I always feel like I'm being pulled in directions. So I've started a bunch of programs, and most of those, if not all of them, have been pretty successful. And I just think wherever my faith leads me is where I should be. I think I'm a lot better at starting than maintaining. And it may be my replacement for active addiction. The instant gratification of meeting outcomes for programs is kind of my drug now. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And along the way, I've done some stuff creatively. I've done some acting and done some TV shows.
Won an Emmy.
It's a regional Emmy, though. So people sometimes Google and they don't find the Emmy, and they think that I'm not telling the truth or something. But
I saw it.
Yeah. If they go to the regional Emmys, they'll see that it's and I don't know if people know that every region has their own Emmy award. So, yeah.
Okay. What do people who have never been homeless need to understand about homelessness?
I think the biggest thing that people who've never experienced homelessness should understand is just that it's an experience. It lasts longer for people, for some people, because of the underlying issues that they brought that actually caused them to get there. But it's just an experience. It's not a lifetime label. Homeless people do resolve their homelessness, but it's up to society to provide the resources to do that. And there are many people who just fall outside of the eligibility criteria, people who may have barriers that are so acute. And this is people with severe mental health issues that the existing models just don't work. And so it's very important that people who haven't been homeless understand that sometimes we just haven't found the right solution for people. And it's not, I hear sometimes people talk about people want to be homeless, and I have, in 20 years of this work, I've never met anybody that truly said that to me. I've heard other people say that about people, but I've never heard a person say that. And I think those who, if people do say that, it's probably their mental health that makes them feel that way. So that would be kind of what I hope people would understand about homelessness, and that it can happen to anybody. People are a paycheck, a illness, a mishap away from becoming homeless. So people should understand that. I've met doctors, I've met lawyers, I've met priests, all of them in homeless shelters. So people would be surprised at who they would meet in a homeless shelter. I met a rocket scientist last week. That was my first. So.
A rocket scientist?
Yes. He's so smart he can't get out of his own way, but he's a rocket scientist. And actually he worked for NASA. And now he's homeless, and it's actually mental illness, but he's a rocket scientist. He will tell you that too.
Wow. One of the things that, by the way, I'm going to return to Buddy Gray for a minute. One of the things that I always really liked about Buddy was he would watch the people at the drop-in center very, very thoroughly. He knew who was there, who was coming in, what they were about, and he would approach someone at the right time, generally, and say, you need to do something for the community. We need you because of your skills in this area.
Absolutely.
And he would bring people out of addiction. He would put them in that program, and it was brilliant.
Well, one of the things he did that I've practiced to this day myself is every week, the new people at the shelter, he met with them. When he said those 4 words to me, it was that first week that I was at the shelter. He met with me, and that was how he got to know everybody there. He wasn't in some lofty tower somewhere. He was down on the floor every day, and as you said, he was talking to people. He was finding out, a little bit about them, kind of analyzing who they were, and helping them become part of something bigger. Because that really is a boost for your self-esteem when you realize I'm not just fighting for myself, I'm fighting for a larger group of people. So that was something he was really good at. And he was an engineer by trade, so, and a carpenter. So.
Talked about, you mentioned, I think I'm going to say this right, you talked about Cincinnati having many more programs for homeless people than other cities who have lost similar programs.
Yes.
What is going on in the country?
Well, there's been a paradigm shift, and it's to the housing first philosophy, and I think that it's to the detriment of the homeless population, and I think that the numbers may continue to grow. As I said before, permanent supportive housing, housing first does work, absolutely, for the people it works for. However, there's a whole other portion of the population, 80 to 90% of the population, that need another alternative. They need a different strategy. And so with the reduction, there's been these analyses that say that transitional housing is too expensive. And so HUD is systematically eliminating transitional housing. And so a lot of the losses were for transitional housing programs. Denver lost $2 million in their balance of state application in transitional housing. Miami lost about $5 million. Most of that, again, was transitional housing. Now, in HUD's defense, in all fairness, they told you that when they listed their priorities for the year. Transitional housing was way down, and they basically were telling you that if you put this in your application, it's not going to get funded. So even Cincinnati lost some transitional housing. So HUD is really, they only want transitional housing for specific populations like youth, 13 to 24, for people leaving the criminal justice system, and for substance abuse programs, but you have to be a qualified substance abuse providers. So all these mom and pop agencies that were doing transitional housing before, those who kind of kept the movement alive when there were no federal dollars, they're kind of being eliminated. So that's what the issue is, and also it's almost impossible unless you get some local dollars to do new shelters. So a lot of communities have lost emergency shelters. Columbus is a really good example of that. They closed most of the emergency shelters in favor of permanent supportive housing. You should actually go up to Columbus now and see the street population. It's considerably higher than it's ever been, and that's because the emergency shelter system is not in place anymore. In Orlando, the shelter that I opened it used to be a low barrier shelter, and then it went to a shelter where you had to meet some conditions. And we had 50 beds for people, but we realized really quickly that those filled up immediately. And one of the reasons I left is because we weren't willing to open up to more people that had low barriers, and that's not my philosophy. And even with the permanent supportive housing that we're doing now, we're working with the 100 hardest to serve homeless people. But there are probably about 10% of those people whose mental illness is so acute that you can't get them to do anything but go to a place that provides them basic necessities, shelter from the storm. And you may not even be able to get them to go into that. So there's a huge population of people that need just that, just some place like the drop-in center where the doors are open, you come as you will. Even if you've had a drink that night, there's still a safe place for you to sleep, but that system is being eliminated. And that's why we're kind of seeing the growth of homelessness, although it's really hard to quantify that because it's actually de-emphasized, and it's also counterproductive for you as a community to actually count the number of homeless people in the community. Because what happens is the next year, because your numbers actually will probably go up, if you actually really do an in-depth job at counting people, people are afraid for those numbers to go up. So many communities undercount on purpose. And that's how HUD has set it up. Now, I met with the secretary a week ago, and she said that's not what they really want, but your score is lowered, and it may affect the amount of dollars you get if homelessness increases. But if the reality is that it increased, then that's what should actually be documented. There's a lot of problems. We had a better system here in Cincinnati with counting people. So you can't count people, especially in the Midwest and the Northeast, the North. You can't count people at the end of January. So it's January the 21st usually, and it's usually in the evening. And we know in Cincinnati and Cleveland and Michigan and most of the Northeast, it's incredibly cold at that time. So the ability to accurately count people, and there's some other parts of counting you have to make. The person has to actually fill out a form. It's usually about 50 questions. Most communities do it either in the evening or early morning, so you're waking somebody up. It's 10 degrees outside. You want them to fill out, you want people to fill out a 50-question form, and you're a perfect stranger. And that's a system that should work. But that's how HUD counts people. Now, if you remember in Cincinnati, what we did is we did a count at a couple of times during the year. So we had, and we also extrapolated some numbers, so we got kind of an accurate count. And that's why, like, the HUD count would be about 3,000, but when Air Inc. did their count, it was about 25,000. Because we count. So a couple of things we know about the population: women are less likely to be homeless in the winter. They'll stay in a dangerous domestic violence situation just to make sure the kids aren't cold. A lot of people are in places that you wouldn't normally be able to count. People are in crack houses, for instance. One thing I found out this year in counting kids is that youth sometimes sleep on top of buildings, which I never knew. I've never counted a young person on top of a building, but for safety, they won't stay in an abandoned building, but they may stay on the roof. And this was from a group of kids that we were able to talk to for a while. We're in Orlando. We're one of 25 cities that are doing an actual youth count, and we were able to find out that from some groups of kids. And there's a word for what we did. When you take a group of people and you talk to them, it's called one of those groups.
Dialogue?
No, they call it a special group. When you talk to a group of people, a small group of people.
You know words.
Yeah, I can't.
You're right, you know words.
It's like a contact group, or not a contact group, but anyway. So we did some dialogue with these students, and they were able to talk to us about some places. School grounds in the woods is kind of one of their campsites. So there's all these places where you don't go in the actual count. And if you don't have the actual number of people that are homeless accurate throughout the country, it's pretty hard to come up with a solution. When the schools count kids that identify themselves as homeless through the school system, their count is 2.5 million. HUD's count is about 500,000. So that's a huge difference. And even with the kids that count, you have to think about it. When you count school children that are homeless, there may be 4 more children at home. There's either 1 or 2 parents. So one of the biggest issues is that we've never been able to, one, get the count right, and the other issue is that we have never been able to have a consistent definition of homelessness among the federal agencies. So who's considered homeless at the Department of Education is different from who's considered homeless by HUD, and then different then from the Department of Health and Human Services. So all these groups have a different definition. The veterans and HUD are pretty close together, but not some of the other agencies. So those are some of the reasons why people lose money.
That's interesting. I would think that homeless is pretty obvious.
Well, so the Department of Education counts people that are doubled up. So if you're doubled up, if you're living with another family in a 1-bedroom house and there's 5 families in there, those 4 families aren't counted. HUD's thinking is that if you're in a place that's supposed to be for housing, so their definition is a place that's non-habitable. That may not be the exact wording. So if you're in a housing unit, whether it's crowded or not, you're still in the housing unit, so you're not in fact homeless. But the Department of Education understands that if 10 families live in a 1-bedroom apartment, then 5 of those families could be asked to leave at any moment, so that person isn't in a secure setting. So that's part of the problem, just that. It's starting, HUD has started to recognize a little bit the doubled up situation, so that's getting better. But that's part of the reason, but many shelters have been closed across the country. And, the other part is there's not many Cincinnati coalitions across the country. A lot of the grassroots coalitions have died out because of funding attacks, because it's really hard, and I found this out at the national level. And even here, it was a struggle at times. When I was here, we got our first couple of national grants, which made it a lot more easy to do, but people don't want to fund advocacy. They don't want to fund organizing. If you put those words in your grant, you're almost guaranteed, except for a few foundations, not to get funded. So those groups that really are kind of looking out for some of the other issues like criminalization or unfair housing practices, those kind of groups are not around as much anymore.
Can you talk about criminalization?
Criminalization continues to be a huge problem within the homeless population, and it's actually a growing problem. That in itself is growing. There's tons of cities that have these ordinances that make it illegal to be homeless. There's anti-camping, anti-sleeping. Some of the worst are the anti-urination laws or anti-using the restroom in public. In Florida, in fact, if you use the restroom in public, not only do you get a ticket for using the restroom, you are labeled as a sex offender, which exacerbates everything that has to do with your life, your living. You can't find housing, you can't find a job, all because you use the restroom in a place that that the city or the county doesn't provide an alternative for. So there is potentially, I think that's mine. We talked to the DOJ a couple of weeks ago. While I was in Washington, we talked with the DOJ. We talked to the assistant to the Attorney General about. So they just in Boise, Idaho, they just challenged a homeless ticket because the person was ticketed in a place where there were no facilities. So because they found it unconstitutional to challenge a homeless person for sleeping in a place where there was no alternative. So we're asking them to use the same logic with the bathroom issue. If there isn't a public restroom, then it should be unconstitutional to fine somebody for using the restroom, because it's a body function that you can't afford. You can't not do. You can't not use the restroom. You can't not sleep. So you can't ticket people for things that they don't provide the resources for. So
they're ticketed for going to the bathroom in a restaurant or something? Or
no,
just on the street?
it would be outside. The restrooms.
So when you're saying restrooms, you're meaning there isn't any restroom. It's just
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because most of the restrooms at restaurants won't allow you to go in. If you're a homeless person. Now, if you go in a suit or button down collared shirt, you're fine. I did that today. But if you're dressed like a homeless person, especially as you deteriorate, when you're outside, it becomes less and less likely that you'll be able to find facilities, and people will their appearance goes down, and that's when they get attacked and challenged. But there is a growing group. There's a group of national advocacy groups, including the Cincinnati Coalition, and I'm a representative in Florida. The organizing efforts called Home Keys, Not Handcuffs, and it's a group of people all around the country that are coalescing around really addressing criminalization. I get people in my office that I'm trying to find housing for that have 300 charges, and landlords will not accept them. And it's not bank robbery or kidnapping or assault. It's no sleeping, it's trespassing, it's all of the crimes that are associated with homelessness. There are a number of people around the country that are starting to file lawsuits. Boise was kind of a game changer for us to have the DOJ to get involved, and they have written a couple of briefs on it. The HUD has now made cities say that they are addressing criminalization in their applications for the continuum of care dollars, which we find a really impactful step. The enforcement is another issue. I know that they're accepting letters from communities that say that their city's not doing that. The challenge with that is that it'll hold up funds coming to the community. So not only will you have the DOJ kind of on your as opposition, but you also have some of the homeless agencies, because it could hold up funding for some of them. But we think that's important. We also think that it's important that the Interagency Council on Homelessness has now started to write on criminalization issues as well. So definitely the issue is out front. There's a lot of movement on it that we haven't seen. The Ford Foundation actually gave out a couple of really large grants to national organizations to start even more work on it. So I think there really is some movement that we haven't seen in a long time. We did, our request from the DOJ was that we found hundreds of cases of criminalization and also hate crimes. And we think that we've just scratched the surface. We don't have the resources that it would take to be able to really get a full scope of what the issue is, but the DOJ does, and we requested that they start to do that. Because in our estimation, there's more hate crimes that have been committed against homeless people than any other protected class. And actually, more than all the protected classes combined. More people have actually been injured or killed than all the other protected classes combined, which is remarkable. So it's a critical issue. Unfortunately, for the next 2 weeks, I live in a place where it's probably being there are the worst offenders, and these are jurisdictional offenders, communities that won't even allow people to be fed outside. There was a 90-year-old preacher arrested for feeding people outside, which is part of why the issue has kind of risen to the forefront. That was such a dramatic travesty of justice that it's made other people aware. So sometimes, the worst offenses are kind of a blessing in disguise, and I think that's what happened in this case. So.
There's one thing I've wondered about for a long time. When you were at the drop-in center, for example, the program in there was run by people who had been addicted, and they knew that they had the experience, and they worked with you through it and all that.
Sure.
Then came the day when the city decided that they couldn't have that anymore. They had to have professionals.
Yes.
Educated professionals.
Yes.
Tell me the difference between the two styles.
Well, I think that the biggest difference is just the empathy that's involved with people who have had that experience, and just the awareness of some of the realities of life as an addict. You really can't get that at school. It's really something that you have to learn through experience. And sometimes people who only have a clinical background, there's some masterful clinicians out there, they're easily manipulated by people in programs. And because of that, at times it's not as effective. The good thing is most people, it doesn't have to be direct experience. It can be indirect experience, an uncle, an aunt, a brother or sister who's had that experience, but there needs to be some experience. And so it really, and really I think the real probably impetus behind that happening was that there were a lot of people with degrees that were locked out of jobs because a lot of people who were just experienced through their own personal experience were getting a lot of the jobs at facilities. Because if you match up 4 years of college versus 30 years of actual experience, a lot of providers were choosing the experience, and I know a lot of places like the drop-in value that experience, and it has its ups and its downs. Sometimes I will also say this in all fairness, there does need to be some clinical involvement, because sometimes during the process of some of those programs, there are times when things are, the person may get deep enough where there's the experiences are so traumatic that a non-professional can't guide that person through, and it could have devastating effects. So I would say that there needs to be some sort of balance. There needs to be the professional and the quasi-professional in order to have the best blend, and that's what I've always done. When I've had to hire for programs, I do want some clinical knowledge because I'm not a clinician myself, and I certainly have dealt with suicidal ideation, but I would rather have a professional do that, because I would be, the last thing I would want on a personal level is to have someone lose their life because I didn't know how to handle that situation. But I do think that empathy is important. I think it also protects the clinician, because people in active addiction can be very manipulative. But I think that what that person with the experience is able to weed out is the sincerity, because sometimes people who've been through programs that are kind of relapsing and coming back, they know the program. They know the program better than people that are administering it, and they can really be less than genuine, and they can really manipulate people that haven't seen that kind of behavior before. I thought the program at the drop-in was one of the best, and I don't think it was who was running the program. I think what was really critical about that program is that when Buddy designed the program, he understood that 30 days wasn't enough for treatment. And, treatment is really expensive now. And so sometimes that's the only kind of treatments that's available. Buddy's program was 6 months. And he also had the community service component. All of these were critical elements of the program. And now, a lot of these programs are 30 days. And they cost $30,000 for those 30 days. Insurance companies have had a great deal to do with that. So I think it's not necessarily the personnel, although personnel is critically important. I think that the length of the program is important because clinically you have drugs in your system for 6 months. They're still in your system. There's residue still in your system for that long. So it has to be at least 6 months. So at least all of the drugs are gone. So that's the important component of it. And it may not be affordable for a lot of programs, especially homeless programs, because again, HUD's backing away from that model a little bit. So that's why you've seen a lot of the changes. HUD transitional won't be funded unless you're qualified as a treatment facility, and there's two sides to it. So you can't get just a mom and pop like the drop-in, so you can't get that funded through HUD. And it's hard to get any kind of programs funded through the city's general fund, as you know. So probably those dollars would have to be private. And the thing about private dollars is people change their mind often. So 1 minute they're really into homeless programs, and the next week it's like labor, and there's no pre-warning, and all of a sudden you have no money in your bank account as an agency, and that's not a good feeling. So. Happened to us at the national level a few times. So there would be people who were really interested in organizing, and then, they get a new board, a couple of new board members, and they change to labor rights or rights of people with alternative lifestyles, and we'd be left with a big hole in our budget. So that was it.
Okay. I think I've asked all my questions.
Okay, well, and we don't want to take up too much of your time, but really, really appreciate you being here and sharing.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. This is the most passionate thing that I have in my life. This journey and this topic. So.
What have we not asked you that you would really like to talk about?
I think you've asked it quite a bit. I think I don't think anything that I can't think of anything. Those are kind of some of the most important topics. A lot of really good friends along the way that made everything that I've done happen. Pat Clifford and Andy Hutzel, and can't ever forget Jimmy Heath. We used to call ourselves Batman and Robin. And we used to joke about that all the time. And so I can never forget, he had such an impact on my life, and I really miss him. I talk to him at times, because we had such a close bond. But there's been, no one can get through this journey by themselves. There have to be some really good people. And they come at different periods in your life, and they all add a little something to it. And hopefully you can hold on to that and, become a better person because of it. There's just so many incredible people that, have stayed here through the test of time, and have really made sure that, dreams don't die. So that's kind of, just the amazing part of this, the relationships that you build. And I do, have some really wonderful people that have walked with me on this journey. And yesterday was kind of really cool because I got to see all of those people. Because, it's really, when you come from out of town, you can see some people one time and some people other time. Having everybody together, that was really cool. So.
All right, I'm just gonna, because I heard so much about Jimmy being the editor of Street Vibes now.
Yeah.
Maybe just a quick story. Just tell me just a little bit about him.
Well, Jimmy was just the coolest person. I mean, he was so talented. I mean, he was incredibly talented. So, like anything he touched, he became like a master of it. And then he was such a passionate guy. He spent some time in South America working with indigenous people on his own dime. Went down there. He had a really good career in the for-profit industry. Was a fantastic photographer, but it was really just a hobby for him. But he became incredible at it. I remember, like, I was talking yesterday. He was our one-man film crew when we did the. It would be so funny. Like, he would be running from camera to camera and running back to the board, and then we had one other guy to help. But Jimmy was like, and then he was a fantastic grant writer. So we wrote some really. Like I said, we got the first national grant for the coalition. We wrote. It's kind of funny thing, but we wrote a transportation grant where we had buses going to family shelters that we paid for. That's gone away now, but so it was really a huge thing. It was like new to the city at the time, but he was really a deep thinker. We had more time than I've had with anybody, just talking. He was a really good listener. He was really feisty too, but he was just an amazing person. He spent some time at the National Coalition with me as well. So Jimmy was just a delightful person, had a great family. I got to spend time with his family, and we really, kind of enjoyed each other. He was my one of my best men and a photographer in my wedding. So, we were really good friends, and I really miss him. And Jimmy just, whatever he could do to help the community, he would. And most of it was free. He never, he took a salary, of course, he had to pay the bills, but, a lot of what he did was free. And just a good human being. And we went through treatment together. So all the years I've been clean, I've had Jimmy Heath by my side. And the three of us were Jimmy, Ed Deering, and myself, and we kind of became really close friends, and did all the things that friends do together. He was just a really, really good guy. His family absolutely adored him. He even opened his own business after he later in life he opened a bed and breakfast, and just was a really cool guy. Taught photography in the community. Just he was an amazing guy, and it's just there were so many gems of people that were here. He was one of them. Yeah, he was a great guy.
Thank you.
And of course, now there's the Jimmy Heath House.
Yes, and I actually helped with some of the. I was a consultant to do marketing for it, and that went through a couple of iterations as well. The original site was on Burton Avenue in Avondale, and we didn't win the tax credit grants on that. It was a monstrosity of a building in a really tough area at the time, so it kind of probably was to our advantage that didn't get funded. But the final opening of Jimmy Heath House was pretty amazing. So it kind of shows you how much he was adored in the community, that people would name a building after him. And so yeah, he really he would have probably not wanted that to happen. He and Buddy were the same way in that way. They didn't want the fanfare. We did an article together when we were still in treatment, and he was really mad for years about doing that article. We did an article in the Enquirer, and it was really early on. I think we were both clean about 60 days or something, but he was furious that he was asked to do that article. He almost left the program because of that. So really, really humble guy. Me, I don't care if my name's out there. No, I'm just joking.
Well, we did mention, we've talked about on a building, there's a big painting of Jim Tarbell. We were saying there should be one of Buddy, and Mary Burke Rivers said that, Bonnie said that Buddy wouldn't like that.
No.
But I absolutely believe that. But I just wonder, because to me it's important that we remember his work and that we have a conversation about his work.
Absolutely.
And the work that must be continued. So
exactly.
Do you think it's a
and
good
it's
idea?
very difficult to have that when nobody knows who you're talking about.
No.
It's critical that people remember him.
I think it'd be a travesty and a mistake to let his memory die. I would be in favor of doing a mural for him. I mean, we have Buddy's place, which kind of is part of his memory. We have the Jimmy Heath house, but I think a picture of Buddy is absolutely something that should happen and appropriate, especially if there's a picture of Jim Tarbell. I think that a mural on the Recovery Hotel would be amazing and absolutely the right thing to do. And I know it would be pretty expensive to do that. And I know Mary's point, I think, maybe is more to the expense of it. But I certainly think, Buddy might have, he didn't want the fanfare. He didn't. But I think he would be in favor of the memory of him as part of the struggle. I think he would be open to that.
And the inspiration of him. I mean, we really do need that inspiration.
Absolutely,
today,
especially when you look around
especially
here.
when you look around, yeah.
I don't recognize. I was riding down.
It's like having
I was
his
like
help.
shocked. Because it every time I come back it inches up further up Vine Street, and like where it's at now I would have never imagined. And there's two sides to gentrification as well. If you maintain part of the community for the original residents, I think it's fine, but that hasn't been done here. I mean, it's kind of like a total wipeout of the history, of the relationships, of the fellowship of the community. I mean, it's totally gone now, and it's pretty amazing. I mean, I would have wanted the neighborhood to be safer from when I first got here, but that didn't mean that everybody had to go. It meant that there needed to be better law enforcement, because there are some of those containment communities. The Wire. Did you ever watch The Wire?
No, The Wire is great.
So The Wire had, and it was a drama. It was drama. It was a dramatization of kind of what life is like. It was exaggerated, but there was this containment zone where they were able to do anything they want to, and then outside of that, law enforcement was pretty heavy, and that's what this neighborhood is. That's what this neighborhood has always been. You don't have any open air drug dealing in Clifton. You don't have any in the downtown central business district, but you have it over the Rhine, and you have to ask yourself, how are you able to enforce the downtown business district or Clifton, but not this little small community called over the Rhine? It's because it's a pattern of containment, and I'll always believe that some communities are sacrificed for what people think of as the greater good. So.
You mentioned Dr. King yesterday and being killed because he fought against poverty.
Yes.
You also mentioned Buddy.
Yes.
I don't know if you have anything you want to say about it.
No, I think that that if people yell loud enough, if people organize enough people, and they fight the true powers in this country, there's a very strong chance that their voice will be eliminated. I think that I've always thought that Buddy's death was not an accident, and I know that Martin Luther King's death was not an accident. There's a few more. John F. Kennedy. There's a lot of people who were speaking against what is the injustice in our world, whose voices were eliminated, and you don't hear many of those voices now, and that's why the people who kind of assume that role but don't have the credibility to actually do it, they're not under any threat at all, because they're not really speaking to the real issues. There's a couple of voices out there. I'm challenged by the current election. I have two people I worked with very closely before who are very different, but there's not many true voices out there. And it's the same thing with the coalitions. It's really a part of the same issue. That's why you only have a few Cincinnati coalitions and RAP out in California that work on the issue, because they've been silenced in other ways. So some people are so powerful that they have to be completely eliminated. So people are killed, and then there are organizations that are so powerful that they have to be killed as well. They're not physically killed, but they're killed through finances, through ordinances, through shaming their leaders. So that kind of thing happens all the time, and it's a pattern, I believe, in this country.
What would you any advice for young advocates or would-be advocates?
I would say that you can't be afraid to fight the powers that be, and you have to do it in the ways that have worked forever, that people are kind of have backed off from. People are not as interested in public demonstrations anymore or direct action, but all of the historical victories have come as a result of those things. We didn't get voters' rights or women's rights or any other rights by, just sitting on the sidelines and writing letters to our congressmen. It's because we had direct action and we protested very loudly. We got to continue to do that. There's no value in polite politics, and so we got to get out of the politically correct advocacy world that we're in now. And I know it's tougher for agencies, but it's not as tough for individuals. So I hope that individuals will continue to do that and start to do it. I see that a little bit in the Black Lives Matter movement, but we're kind of missing the boat right now on voting rights. That's the next generational issue because it's already started, and hopefully we can catch up because there's a very real chance that we get some people who could be catastrophic to this country and maybe even to the world because people's rights to vote have been taken away. And so we really need some movement on those issues, and I would hope that young people can get involved so that they'll have a right to vote. So that would be my advice to young people.
Well, thanks so much. I don't want to take
Well,
any more of
you.
your time,
Well,
although
thank
I
you.
would enjoy talking to you
Well,
so
thank you.
much.
Enjoy talking to you
Good
as
talk to you
well.
all.
Thank you.
all
Man.
day,
Thank you
and,
so much.